There is a version of you that has everything you say you want. The career, the relationship, the peace of mind, the life that feels like yours. And that version of you is not some distant fantasy. It is not waiting on luck, or the right timing, or someone else's permission. That version of you is already possible. So why aren't you living it? That is the question that sits at the center of one of the most quietly devastating books written in recent years. And the answer, when it finally lands, does not feel like an accusation. It feels like a mirror being held up for the very first time. The Mountain is You by Brianna Wiest is not a book about motivation. It is not going to tell you to wake up earlier, hustle harder, or manifest your dreams. What it is going to do is something far more uncomfortable and far more transformative. It is going to show you the ways you have been standing in your own way, not because you are broken, not because you are weak, but because a part of you learned a long time ago that staying stuck was the safest thing you could do. Let that sit for a moment. Because most of us, when we think about our problems, look outward. The job that never seems to come through. The relationship that always falls apart at the same point. The goal we keep starting and abandoning. We look at the circumstances, the other people involved, the timing, the economy, the bad luck. We build very convincing cases for why things are not working. And sometimes those cases are real. Life is genuinely hard. There are real obstacles. But Wiest is asking a different question. She is asking, what if, underneath all of those external explanations, there is also something inside you that keeps choosing the familiar over the possible? What if you have been climbing the wrong mountain? Or worse, what if you have been building the mountain yourself? That is the central metaphor of this entire book, and it is worth slowing down to really feel it. The mountain is you. The thing that is in your way is not always out there. Sometimes the block is built from your own beliefs, your own fears, your own deeply unconscious need to stay exactly where you are. Not because you are a self-destructive person, but because self-destruction, for many of us, was once a form of self-protection. Let me explain that, because it is one of the most important ideas in the book, and it changes everything. Imagine a child who grows up in an unpredictable home. Maybe love was inconsistent. Maybe approval was something that had to be earned and could be taken away without warning. Maybe success was met with jealousy rather than celebration. That child's nervous system learns something very early. Wanting things is dangerous. Getting too hopeful is dangerous. Succeeding might mean things change, and change, even positive change, felt like loss of control. So the child develops a strategy. Stay small. Do not want too much. If you start to rise, find a way to come back down where it is familiar, where it is known, where it is safe. That child grows up. The circumstances change completely. But the nervous system? It does not update automatically. It keeps running the same old program. And so the adult version of that child finds themselves, years later, sabotaging the promotion they worked toward, pulling away from the relationship that was actually going well, overspending when they finally save money, picking fights for reasons they cannot explain, getting sick right before a big opportunity. And they sit there confused, frustrated with themselves, wondering why they cannot just get out of their own way. This is what Wiest calls self-sabotage. And her definition is important. She does not frame it as stupidity or weakness or some mysterious character flaw. She frames it as a coping mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. It was once a strategy for survival. It just never got the memo that the emergency is over. And this reframe, this single shift in how you understand your own behavior, might be the most liberating thing in the entire book. Because when you stop asking, why am I so self-destructive, and start asking, what is this behavior trying to protect me from, everything changes. The question becomes less about shame and more about curiosity. Less about fixing yourself and more about understanding yourself. And understanding, real understanding, is where actual change begins. So what does self-sabotage actually look like? Because here is the thing. It does not always look like obvious destruction. It is not always the dramatic collapse or the obvious bad decision. Sometimes it is the 1,000 small ways we avoid the life we say we want. It looks like the person who wants deep connection but keeps choosing emotionally unavailable partners.
It looks like the writer who has the idea, the talent, the time, and still cannot sit down to write. It looks like the person who finally starts to eat well, feel better, gain confidence, and then suddenly starts skipping workouts, eating for comfort, going back to old habits. It looks like arriving almost at the destination and then, for reasons that feel completely external, turning around. It looks like the anxiety that spikes right when things start to go well, as if some part of you is scanning for the catch, waiting for the other shoe to drop, making sure you never get too comfortable in something good. Wiest walks through so many of these patterns, and reading them, or in this case, hearing them, you will almost certainly recognize yourself somewhere, not in a painful way, in a relieved way. The kind of recognition that makes you exhale and think, oh, so it is not just me. There is a name for this. There is a reason for this. And the reason always leads back to the same place. Unmet needs, unprocessed emotions, old beliefs about what you are allowed to have, what you are worthy of, what is safe to want. One of the ideas Wiest explores that I find particularly powerful is the concept of what she calls emotional debt. Think of it this way. Every feeling you have ever suppressed, every grief you swallowed, every rage you smiled through, every fear you told yourself was irrational and pushed down, it did not disappear. It does not disappear. The body keeps the score, as the saying goes. Those emotions get stored, and they demand payment, one way or another. Sometimes that payment comes as anxiety. Sometimes it comes as inexplicable sadness. Sometimes it comes as behavior you do not understand. Choices that do not make logical sense but feel somehow necessary. This is why intellectual understanding is not always enough. You can know, in your mind, all the reasons why a certain behavior does not serve you. You can make lists, set goals, create systems, and still find yourself back in the same pattern. Because the part that is running the sabotage is not your thinking mind, it is the emotional body. The part that learned, before you even had words for it, what to fear and what to reach for. This is why healing, real healing, is not about willpower. It is not about discipline, though discipline plays a role later. It is about going back to the source. It is about asking not just what you are doing, but why. Not in a blaming, analyzing, overthinking way, but in a gentle, parental way. The way you would speak to a child who was acting out because they did not know how to say what they needed. Wiest uses the idea of becoming your own loving parent as one of the central practices of this work. And I want to talk about that for a moment because it sounds simple and it is actually profound. Most of us are extraordinarily harsh with ourselves. We have an internal voice that narrates our failures with a kind of cruelty we would never extend to someone we love. You are so stupid. Why do you always do this? You will never get this right. And we think that voice is our conscience, our inner critic keeping us accountable. But what it actually is, more often than not, is an internalized voice from the past. The critical parent, the dismissive teacher, the culture that told you your worth was conditional. We absorbed those voices so deeply that we began to generate them ourselves, long after the original source was gone. Reparenting yourself means interrupting that voice, not with toxic positivity, not with pretending, but with the kind of steady, honest compassion a genuinely good parent offers. The acknowledgement that you are doing your best with what you have. The recognition that your struggles make sense given where you came from. The calm, firm guidance toward better without the punishment of shame. And here is the thing about shame. Wiest is very clear on this. Shame does not create change, it creates hiding. When we shame ourselves for our patterns, we do not become more motivated to shift them. We become more motivated to hide them, to pretend they are not there, which makes them worse. Shame is self-sabotage's best friend. It keeps the pattern alive by making it too painful to honestly examine.
This is why curiosity is the antidote, not judgment. Curiosity. What is this behavior showing me? What need is it trying to meet? What belief is underneath it? What emotion am I trying to avoid feeling? These questions, asked genuinely and without cruelty, are the beginning of the end of the pattern. Now, let me ask you something directly. Think of one area of your life right now where you feel genuinely stuck. Not because of a lack of resources or a lack of effort, but where something keeps pulling you back. Where you keep getting close and then something derails you. Where you have tried and it has not moved. Can you sit with the question, what might staying stuck be protecting you from? Not forever, just for a moment. Because the answer to that question might be more useful than any strategy you have ever been given.
Wiest also writes beautifully about the idea that our biggest fears and our deepest desires are often the exact same thing. The thing you want most is often the thing you fear most. The love you crave is from the same category of experience as the heartbreak you dread. The success you want comes with the visibility you fear. The freedom you long for comes with the responsibility that terrifies you. And so we hover, perpetually, at the edge of our own becoming, wanting and retreating, reaching and pulling back. She talks about how so many people have what she calls a comfortable misery, a life that is not what they truly want, but familiar enough that the prospect of changing it feels more threatening than staying, because at least here, you know what to expect. At least here, the pain is a pain you understand. The unknown, even the unknown of something better, triggers the threat response of the nervous system. And so people stay in jobs they dread, relationships that drain them, versions of themselves that no longer fit, not because they lack the desire to change, but because the change itself feels like a form of death. And in a way, it is. Every genuine transformation requires the death of a previous self. The self who was small has to die so the fuller version can live. The identity built around struggle has to dissolve to make room for peace. And the nervous system does not distinguish between the death of something bad and the death of something good. It just registers, something I knew is gone, and it fires an alarm. This is why healing can actually feel like getting worse before it gets better. Why the moment you start to really grow, old patterns often intensify, old stories get louder, old behaviors resurface with extra force. It is not a sign that you are failing, it is a sign that the system is fighting to maintain its previous equilibrium. Understanding this is the difference between someone who pushes through that phase and someone who interprets it as proof that change is impossible for them. One of the most clarifying sections of this book is when Wiest talks about the difference between coping and healing. And this distinction is quietly radical. Coping is managing the symptom. Healing is addressing the source. Coping is the glass of wine at the end of the stressful day. Coping is binge watching when you are overwhelmed. Coping is staying busy so you never have to feel what is underneath the busyness. None of this is inherently bad. We all need coping strategies. They are survival tools. But when coping becomes the entire strategy, when we are only ever managing the symptom and never asking what is generating it, we get stuck in an endless loop. The stress comes back. The anxiety returns. The heaviness does not lift. Because the source is still there, unaddressed, quietly generating everything we are trying to suppress. Healing asks, why am I stressed in this particular way? What does this anxiety have to tell me about unmet needs? What is the heaviness actually about? It is slower, less immediately satisfying, often messy and non-linear. But it is the only thing that actually moves the needle. And this brings us to one of the most important threads in the entire book. The idea that you cannot think your way out of a feeling. You have to feel your way through it. We live in a culture that is extraordinarily skilled at bypassing emotion. We analyze, rationalize, problem solve, distract, medicate, philosophize, spiritualize,
and intellectualize our way around the actual experience of feeling something. And it makes sense. Feeling deeply is uncomfortable. It can feel overwhelming, even threatening. But what we resist does not dissolve, it embeds. And it resurfaces, usually at the least convenient times, usually in the most indirect and confusing forms. Wiest writes about the importance of learning to be with your own emotions. Not to be swallowed by them, not to perform them, but to actually let them move through you, which is what emotions are biologically designed to do. The word emotion even contains it. E-motion, energy in motion. They are meant to be felt and released, not stored indefinitely in the body. This means developing a tolerance for discomfort that most of us were never taught to have. It means sitting with the grief, the anger, the longing, the fear, long enough to hear what it is actually saying. Long enough to give it the acknowledgement it is asking for. And in that acknowledgement, something shifts. Not dramatically, not immediately, but it shifts. There is also an important chapter, woven throughout really, about identity, about who you believe yourself to be. Because this might be the most invisible and most powerful form of self-sabotage of all. When your identity is built around a certain story, even a painful story, you will unconsciously work to maintain evidence that the story is true. If you believe, deep down, that you are someone who is unlucky, you will find the evidence everywhere. If you believe you are someone who cannot sustain success, you will create the proof. Not because you are trying to, but because the brain is a pattern-matching machine that filters reality through whatever story it has been given as its operating system. Changing your behavior, in the long run, requires changing the story. Requires asking, who would I be if this old narrative were no longer true? What would I do differently tomorrow if I genuinely believed I was someone who was capable of this? And then, crucially, acting from that new identity before you fully feel it. Because feeling always follows action. You do not wait to feel brave to act bravely. You act, and the feeling builds around the evidence you create. This is the actual work, not the inspiration, not the insight, as valuable as insight is, but the daily, unglamorous, consistent choice to respond differently than you did before. To catch the old pattern and, even imperfectly, choose something else. To speak to yourself with slightly more kindness than yesterday. To stay with the discomfort one beat longer. To take one small action in the direction of who you want to become. Wiest does not pretend this is easy. She does not offer the kind of breathless positivity that makes you feel temporarily lifted and then more empty when it fades. What she offers instead is something rarer: honesty. A clear-eyed, compassionate recognition that this work is hard, it takes time, it is not linear, and it is also the most important thing you can do with your life. Because every other goal, every relationship, every ambition, every version of your life you want to build, runs through this. It all runs through who you are being on the inside. The mountain is you. And that is not a sentence of defeat. It is a sentence of extraordinary power. Because if you are the obstacle, you are also the path. If the thing that has been in your way is built from your own unprocessed pain, your own outdated beliefs, your own survival strategies from a previous chapter, then the thing that has been in your way can be moved. Not overnight, not perfectly, but moved. This book does not tell you that healing is a destination you arrive at. It tells you it is a practice, an ongoing, imperfect, deeply personal practice of choosing yourself, of understanding yourself, of becoming more and more aligned with the person you actually are, rather than the person your fear taught you to be. And perhaps the most quietly powerful thing it says is this: the life you want is not punishment for who you have been. It is not something you have to earn through suffering. It is not waiting at the end of a long road of fixing everything that is wrong with you. It is available to you through the radical, patient, ongoing act of becoming honest with yourself, about what you feel, about what you want, about what has been in the way, about who built the mountain, and about who has, all along, had exactly what it takes to climb it. You came here because something in you is ready. Maybe not perfectly ready, maybe not without fear, but ready enough to start asking the real questions. And sometimes that is all it takes. The right question, asked honestly, has a way of starting everything.